are, I think, handicapped in some respects by the effects of the fire, and the chairman is caught up in those. So we're going to start without him, and I'm going to call, with his permission, to order the 92nd meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. The first item on our agenda is Professor John Quelch of Harvard and Mr. Mackey from Anderson and Krieger and General Counsel Blue giving us, and perhaps Ombudsman Ziemba, giving us an overview of foreign and corrupt practices. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to the professor, to Mr. Mackey, and thank you very much for being here, and we look forward to the interchange of the next few minutes.
Okay, good morning, Commissioner and other members of the Commission. Thanks for the invitation to be here today. I have a few opening remarks, and then I'll be able to hopefully address questions and comments from the members. First of all, by way of background, I'm a professor of business administration at Harvard Business School. I've been on and off the Harvard faculty since 1979. I've served in overseas positions as Dean of the London Business School for several years, and also most recently as Dean of the China-Europe International Business School, which is the leading business school in China, where I served as Dean on a leave of absence from Harvard between 2011 and 2013, returning to Boston in February of this year. I've also served as an independent director of approximately 10 publicly traded companies in the US and the UK during the course of my career, many of which have worldwide operations. So with that particular background, let me start by posing the question of whether or not it's sufficient to comply with the customs of each jurisdiction in which a company operates around the world. And this particular notion is centuries old. It stems from a famous letter from St. Ambrose to St. Augustine, in which the quote that we're all familiar with is included, "When in Rome, do as Romans do." And this is a philosophy of what's called ethical relativism, as opposed to a philosophy of universalism, which holds that there are fundamental moral principles that cannot vary with time or space. And for the Commission's benefit, although it may not be necessarily pertinent to the issues under consideration, I would subscribe more to the universalist view than the ethical relativist view. Now, with that by way of background, let me try and get a little bit more practical. From the mid-20th century, multinational corporations ran their foreign subsidiaries largely as independent, decentralized operations, and respect for local customs was a convenient fig leaf to operate to lower standards in developing versus developed countries. During the latter part of the 20th century, several forces meant the traditional decentralized multinational company morphed into a more centralized and integrated global corporation with a worldwide brand reputation to defend. And those forces would have included, for example, freer cross-border trade flows, cheaper and more rapid cross-border communications, and multi-country supply chains. All of these integrative forces resulted in the traditional multinational becoming more of a globally integrated corporation, operating to one set of policies and standards worldwide. Increasingly, customers in developed countries are today interested in the supply chain inputs associated with the products and services they purchase. For example, some Starbucks customers pay a few cents more for fair trade coffee that provides more of a financial benefit for small coffee growers. And more recently, consumers have pressed major retailers in the US regarding the working conditions at their Bangladesh apparel suppliers and their subcontractors following the Rana Plaza building collapse in the early part of this year in Bangladesh. So customers are more concerned about issues related to what's happening at the front end of their supply chains for the products and services they purchase. Now, regardless of these trends, developed country legislation contradicts and has contradicted the de minimis standard of complying with local customs. Notably, the 1977 Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the U.S., the 1986 Anti-Money Laundering Act in the U.S., and the 2010 UK Bribery Act govern the global behaviors of any company that does business in the UK or in the USA and UK respectively. The UK Bribery Act of 2010 is slightly tougher than the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in several respects. It makes a company liable for bribery by individual employees, and not just bribery of government officials, but also private bribery as well, as it's sometimes referred to. The UK Bribery Act explicitly precludes hiding behind third-party agents and spells that out in much more detail. And it also renders local customs irrelevant as a defense for bad behavior, except when permitted by law. And one point that I think I should make is that pretty much every jurisdiction in the world has a law against bribery. Whether or not that law is actually enforced is a different matter. But pretty much every jurisdiction has a law of some sort on the books against bribery. And therefore, if a multinational company says that it is in compliance with all local laws and with relevant U.S. laws, then it is possible for the company to be considered certainly de minimis in compliance. And it's not necessarily the case that a company could then be challenged for not having standards of a U.S. Character enforced in jurisdictions where those standards are not necessarily required by law, local law, unless those standards relate specifically to such things as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Now, how do global companies stay out of trouble? Because let's face it, no global company with a brand reputation is interested in getting into trouble in this kind of area. The cost of doing so reputationally can be very high relative to the likely benefit of not being very strictly adherent to standards and to laws. So the first thing a company has to do is to assess its risk of exposure, for example, to bribery by or of employees. And there are three questions that you need to ask in order to assess your risk exposure. The first is the simple question, are there opportunities for corruption to occur? Perhaps, for example, the company's internal control systems are weak. Perhaps there's inadequate monitoring or supervision. The second question to ask in terms of assessing risk are how severe are the pressures and the temptations that bear upon the company and its employees. Perhaps competition is especially intense. Perhaps employees are incented to achieve very aggressive revenue targets at all costs. So that's the second question. Are the pressures and temptations on the employees putting the company's reputation at risk as well as the employee's reputation? And then the third question in assessing risk is, does the company allow easy rationalization? Perhaps bribes have been commonplace. Perhaps they've been approved tacitly by superiors. Perhaps the bribes appear to do no harm. Indeed, perhaps to assist government officials who are grossly underpaid. So does the company allow easy rationalization? So these are the three questions that I think are typically used to assess the degree of risk exposure of a company to getting into trouble. So having assessed the risks, the company must then design compliance policies and procedures, including a code of ethics, and equally, if not more important, the corporate leadership has to set an example and a tone that supports the unswerving implementation of these compliance policies and procedures. I'll just, without going into too much detail, very briefly give you 6 elements that collectively represent a good code of ethics and compliance. So a good code requires an employee to report any suspected violation to their manager, to the legal department of the subsidiary, or to the corporation's chief ethics and compliance officer. A good code offers a confidential ethics hotline and assures protection by the board of directors for any employee who raises a concern in good faith. A good code requires all managers to ensure their direct reports understand the code, foster an environment that requires compliance, and maintain all relevant business records. A good code gives specific examples to guide employee behavior, especially regarding gifts. For example, all gifts to government officials are typically banned, and gifts to others, customers or vendors, are typically limited to, say, below $100 or some nominal amount, and should not be accepted or given when doing so might create a feeling of obligation or affect business decision-making, either of the employee, of the vendor, or the customer. Next, a good code is backed up by online training programs that all managers must pass, and typically on an annual basis. And finally, a good code requires all employees sign a document each year affirming that they have read, complied with, and will comply with the code.
What was the first of the 5?
The first is that an employee report any suspected violation to their manager. I think there were 6 in all that I mentioned. Now, to reiterate, a strong code of ethics and compliance is insufficient if the appropriate emphasis on compliance and zero tolerance is not set by the CEO and the board of directors. In fact, the board of directors should clearly oversee the compliance program, and a specific officer, a chief compliance officer, should have direct access and report to the board of directors. And in addition, compliance should be a part of the assessment of the discretionary bonus of all senior managers. In addition, the code of ethics and the code of compliance has to be publicly expressed through the value statements of the corporation. So not just the CEO setting a tone on an ad hoc basis, but publicly expressed in the core values of the corporation. And discipline has to be handed not only to violators, but also consideration has to be given to discipline being handed to willing or unwitting bystanders in the corporation who, shall we say, turn a blind eye to something that they notice and suspect but fail to report to management. Just to give you one example, one company's code of ethics is accompanied by a letter from the CEO which states, to give you a quote, "We compete on the quality and price of our services and products. We do not compete by making false or misleading statements about our competitors or by engaging in illegal business practices." A few paragraphs of conclusion. Large, well-known, publicly traded multinational companies with strong brand reputations have every incentive to avoid problems or the appearance of problems. And in my experience, problems are more likely to arise with smaller, less experienced multinationals that have grown quickly through the acquisition of foreign companies and their employees, that have not embedded their core values worldwide throughout the employee base, and have fewer resources to devote to compliance. So, as you might imagine, typically the higher profile, larger U.S. multinational is going to have the resources available and the common sense and willpower to take the relevant steps to be maybe not just in compliance, but perhaps over and above and beyond compliance as well. I worked full-time in China, as I mentioned, for 2 years between January 2011 and 2013. I had many conversations with chief executives of China's subsidiaries of global corporations regarding corruption, usually requests for bribes or favors from government officials to facilitate either customs clearances or contract awards. And it became clear to me that the FCPA and strong corporate ethics empower local managers to say no. And after saying no 2 or 3 times, those soliciting typically simply move on to a less steadfast company. But there's no evidence that the performance of the people saying no, the financial success or performance of the people saying no, is deleteriously affected by them taking that stand. What honest government officials in many emerging economies do seek and value, and there are many, of course, the vast majority who are honest government officials, is not bribes, but technical assistance from Western multinationals. So a global food company, for example, might provide behind-the-scenes advice on how to legislate food safety or design and implement food inspection programs. The company benefits from the opportunity to shape the regulations that may govern its operations, but at the same time, the broader society and government, more broadly defined than a single individual, benefits from that kind of advice and technical support. So there is, moreover, as I've already indicated, no evidence that corporations that take a strong ethical line lose business or underperform. On the contrary, they're likely to command greater respect among customers and vendors in emerging economies. They're likely to attract and retain higher performing employees and to cultivate the perception that their products and services are superior and differentiated and in high demand, with no need for bribes, kickbacks, or gifts to be part of that equation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will now welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you, Mr. Quelch. My apologies for being late. I take pride in having been Jane Swift's Chief of Staff when you were appointed
Indeed.
Chair of the Massport Board after the 9/11 fiasco, and did a great job bringing that agency back in good shape. Commissioners, questions?
I had a question about, Mr. Quelch, about your talking about the large corporate companies who seem to do a better job at compliance and have the resources to pay attention, but yet we continually hear about well-known companies that are alleged to have violated in various countries, pretty well-known companies. So I guess I was surprised when you said, I guess overall they're doing a better job, but there'll still be examples when a large company will
Right.
have
So
a
I think,
violation.
first of all, there's a little bit of sampling bias because those are the cases that are likely to gain more media attention. But secondly, in addition, if a jurisdiction is seeking to make an example of in a particular industry among a group of multinational companies that may be sailing close to the edge, it would typically select one of the higher profile companies in order to make an example of that company. So without naming names, for example, in China at the moment, there's recently been a series of allegations against a major multinational pharmaceutical company regarding essentially 5 years' worth of behavior that involved funds of the company being used to pay doctors and hospital employees who are government officials in China monies via false invoices for travel to conferences, medical conferences that never took place or may have taken place, but the people in question didn't attend. So that is a very substantial case that is currently under investigation in China. And when you look at what has happened, what you find is that the senior local employees were all complicit in it, or the folks who have been indicted are people who were senior local employees. And the expatriate top management seemed to be oblivious, or claims to be oblivious to what was going on. And I think that is a good example. Whether or not it's proven or not remains to be seen, but the case in itself is a good example of where there can be a breakdown. It's where corporate headquarters is pressing for increased revenues, increased profit delivery. The senior manager on the ground in a country is feeling that pressure and is transferring that pressure to his or her subordinates. Those subordinates are of the local culture and talking among each other in the local language. The top person may not speak that language or necessarily socialize with those people. And this is fundamentally where things go wrong. Now, if there were a sufficiently strong internal audit and control system supervised from offshore that meticulously investigated each year the books in high-risk countries, then that might have been caught earlier. But this is kind of the practice. I'm giving you this in detail so you have an example of a real scenario where things did apparently break down and some of the reasons why that breakdown occurred.
Thank you.
Mr. Quelch, in just that very point, is it fair to say that the more that profits come from outside of, say, the United States, into these satellite or other places, the more incentive there will be in what you describe, this pressure to perform or overperform in those places? Is that a fair statement? And
I'm not sure that the connection that you're making has been proven, but it's certainly the case that in the last 5 years, since the recession of 2008, that multinational corporations have looked to emerging economies to drive their profit and their revenue growth. And that has resulted in a level of, a necessary level of decentralization to the chief executive of the subsidiary on the ground in each of these main emerging economies to deliver. And I think while that may on the surface look like a raising of the risk profile for that company, which I think is what you're implying.
right.
At the same time, I believe that there has been a great realization in most of the companies that I deal with, at least, that they have to correspondingly up their game in terms of the compliance effort and the quality and number of people devoted to the compliance function within their corporations. So I think maybe you're right in saying the risk profile has gone up, but I'm not sure that that has not been matched in most cases by corresponding improvements in the infrastructure for compliance.
Also, as you know, we're particularly interested in this topic because we're regulating, or about to be regulating, multinational companies potentially here that do a lot of business elsewhere, where there's also a lot of regulation. And that intersection is, bribery aside, for example, that intersection could be very difficult to sort out, if I may sort of oversimplify. What can you tell us relative to that cross-overlap of regulations in general?
Right. Well, the FCPA is pretty clearly focuses on bribery of government officials. I think the thing to bear in mind when you're thinking about this is that in many emerging economies which have a very large state sector, there are many people who are government officials, such as doctors, for example, who in our context in the US we wouldn't necessarily consider as government officials. So the FCPA, therefore, when it's applied in emerging economies, can be covering a very substantial number of people in terms of who you are not to approach, to bribe or accept bribes from. So that I think, look, the FCPA has been in place since 1977. I think there's not a company that does business internationally out of the United States that's not aware of it. The question is, how good a job are they doing in making absolutely sure nothing is going wrong? But I think the awareness is very high. A second area of potential overlap is in the area of money laundering. So in other words, the use of the movement of funds for the purpose of concealing their source. And this is governed by the Money Laundering Act, the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 1986 and subsequent rulings. And while I think that that's less widely known about than the FCPA, companies, large multinational companies that could be potentially vulnerable to that kind of behavior on the part of suppliers or on the part of customers, I think are very diligent about it, but of course it requires, in a sense, that you know an awful lot about every customer who comes into your business. So there is, I think, a practical issue there with respect to the degree to which a multinational company can be responsible for vetting the credentials, if you like, of every single customer with whom it does business. Obviously, the smaller the number of customers in your base, the easier it is to then cope with that particular challenge. If you're a retailer and you're selling to millions of customers each day, I don't think anyone would say, you as that retailer need to check the credentials of everybody who comes in and buys a couple of items from your store. On the other hand, if you're selling airplanes, the number of customers that you're dealing with is far fewer in number, and you should be able to completely monitor the credentials of everybody that you're doing business with. So I think that there is some practical consideration that bears upon the money laundering issue with respect to your overlap question. A third area which you haven't highlighted, but I would just mention it because it bears on the fair trade coffee example that I shared with you earlier, is the issue of whether or not customers for your products are interested in how you are managing your supply chain. And there, I think what you find is that some companies that might be vulnerable to reputation damage in this area have over and above compliance requirements that bear upon and explicitly refer to human rights and labor rights practices in the jurisdictions that they're dealing with. So in other words, it wouldn't be sufficient for someone to say, we ourselves don't employ any child labor, but we absolutely require and ensure that all of our suppliers, our independent suppliers, also do not use child labor in making goods that our name is then subsequently attached to. So that might be an area in some industries where there might be the overlap you refer to, and where there might be consumer pressure from the public in the West to enforce higher standards of supply chain production on the brands that they buy from.
That ties into a question that I wanted to ask, which goes all the way back to the letter to Augustine.
Yeah.
And if I understood you correctly, you said that so long as you comply with domestic law, FCPA and the AML, and the letter of foreign law in the jurisdiction where you're doing business, you can't be criticized for your conduct. Did I understand you correctly?
I'm not a lawyer, but that is my understanding. It's a big question
What?
as to...
Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say it's a question whether or not the famous quote refers just to customs or whether it also refers to laws as well as customs.
As a matter of ethics, not law, what's your... Did I understand you?
Yeah.
Can you not be challenged ethically if you are complying with domestic law as well as the letter of foreign law?
Yes, because the domestic law may, in certain cases, simply not meet the standard that you or I would consider ethically responsible or reasonable. So there might, for example, be labor laws in some countries that permit children of a certain age to work legally. We might ethically challenge that. But if a company were in compliance with that and it was not in violation of any U.S. law, then technically, I guess, the company would be compliant. But as we have seen in the case of the brands that sourced their apparel from factories with potentially poor workplace safety conditions in Bangladesh, you know, there are many consumers who have an ethical issue with buying stuff that has been made under those conditions.
Right.
So you're absolutely correct in your statement.
So it's not, it's a consumer pressure as well as an overriding ethical considerations that can combine to bring criticism on practices that comply both with the domestic and the letter of foreign law.
Yes.
The other question I had is one I'm having trouble thinking through what it really is. So, but it's essentially this. How do you deal with a situation in which there is some apparent violation of foreign law, but it's repeated on a relatively routine basis, but it could not possibly be going on without knowledge and acquiescence of the government at the very highest levels. And I'm not talking about personal bribery, I'm not talking about things of that type, but I'm talking about an economic practice that is pervasive, widespread, and couldn't be going on unless the government at the very top were permitting it. How should a responsible foreign corporation trying to do business in that kind of an environment deal with that?
So I think the Bangladesh case is actually a pretty good example of this, because the ready-to-wear apparel industry in Bangladesh is now the largest export industry in the country. It has grown enormously in importance in the last 10 years. And the conditions under which the workers in the 5,000 or so factories, the conditions under which they have to work are ones that I don't think you or I would find morally acceptable.
Right.
And the government, of course, is in a way a hostage economically to the fact that this industry has mushroomed into a level of, to the level of importance it has. And of course there is the concern, I think unjustified, that we would kill the goose that laid the golden egg if we attempted to, as a government, restrict heavily the practices that occur in this industry. In most cases, though, again, the laws on the books are actually robust, but are not enforced, or the funds available for enforcement are simply not sufficient to deal with the magnitude of the enforcement problem, given the growth of the industry over the last decade. Again, if you are a responsible Western multinational, you are perhaps, it takes a tragedy, as it often does in the commons, to stimulate action. And it took 1,100 people dying at Rana Plaza to stimulate the leading manufacturers and retailers who source from Bangladesh to come together with workers' rights organizations and NGOs, and in fairness, with some people within the government of the country, to try and craft solutions that would upgrade conditions and compensation, but at the same time preserve the economic health of the industry, so people would not lose their jobs as a result of the industry migrating elsewhere to another low-cost economy. I'm not sure if this example helps
it does.
answer your question.
It does, and I want to now just change the parameters of the question a little bit. Suppose to take your example, the government were not hostage to this economic center, and suppose the issue were purely economic, didn't involve human rights, if you will. And so the government was not a hostage, but had created or at least watched with benevolence an economic pattern arise that it could stop, but it doesn't want to stop for a variety of reasons. It's pervasive. It's purely economic in its impact, and foreign corporations are in the middle of an environment in which that exists. Can they ethically participate in that, even though it may, on the surface, it may violate the letter of the law?
the letter of international
of
law
domestic
or
law.
local
Domestic law. In other words, there's a massive unenforcement tolerated not, that's part of the economic policy of the country, and it isn't because the government is captive, it's because the government wants it. The government, in effect, has created a facade of legitimacy, knowing that it's not going to enforce the barriers to economic activity it's set up. I realize that's wildly hypothetical.
No,
It's a hard question to follow, but I
No,
don't
I
want to
understand
zero in on
I understand the
particular
question, and
case.
I think that the obligation on a U.S. company is to follow the law of the foreign jurisdiction and not to follow the current incumbent government's interpretation or lack of interpretation of the law. Again, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm sure that the notion that certain behavior that is not legal in the foreign jurisdiction is somehow or other tolerated or permitted or encouraged by the foreign government in question would be used as a strenuous defense on behalf of that company. But my reading of the FCPA and the UK Bribery Act, for example, would be that if the company is complying with the law in the foreign jurisdiction, that is a defense.
Yes, I was more thinking of the ethical than the legal component.
Well, I think every company decides which customers it wishes to serve and which markets it wishes to operate in. Right. And some companies take the view that certain markets are too high risk, going back to the various risk factors that I mentioned earlier, too high risk for them to wish to participate relative to the return. Right. And other companies decide for a variety of reasons, maybe the market is so attractive in a particular country that it's impossible to ignore it if you want to be a serious global player in that industry.
Thank you.
Is there I can't recall whether China is actually a member of the WTO, but
Yes,
how does the WTO come down on some of these issues?
The WTO really governs trade relations between countries. And what the WTO, I think that's pertinent to this particular discussion, what the WTO does not permit is for country A to impose, country A that's a member of the WTO, to impose restrictions on its trade with country B that's also a member of the WTO. So, for example, before the WTO, the United States exerted considerable pressure on Cambodia to raise its labor standards as a result of imposing quotas or the threat of quotas on Cambodian imports into the United States, specifically in the textile arena. Once the WTO came into being, among members of the WTO, such acts, such unilateral acts are prohibited. So effectively, the leverage that can be exerted in the current WTO environment, where China is a member of the WTO, is substantially reduced from where it was before. Of course, there are provisions in the WTO regarding dumping and such behavior that can be pursued in the courts.
How would you suggest, you referenced companies that you see as being helpful or aggressive in terms of trying to work with a local host government to offer changes and improvements and regulations, you know, again, to raise their standards so it meets their own standards or their own efforts to protect their brand. How do other bodies, how would you suggest we even look at a company that's more proactive in doing that than a company that's just kind of following along to play along, and whatever the government imposes upon me, I'll deal with it?
Yeah. Do you mean how would you differentiate among those two types of companies?
And what value does that bring?
Right. So, one possibility is in an oversight context to have a periodic review of the company's compliance and ethics codes and their enforcement. In other words, the requirement that there be an annual report that is delivered by any company that is receiving a license, that basically requires them to report against a set of criteria that might be established regarding what constitutes a robust and well-enforced compliance program, to periodically review that for any company with which you might be doing business. And I think that those companies that are operating in a self-confident fashion and/or are complying on an over and above basis, which many companies do, by the way, because they wish to actually be ahead of the regulations. In many industries, what you'll find is that there are companies that have an over and above and beyond, I should say, compliance policy. It takes several years for new regulations to come into play. It's to the advantage of a leading company to be implementing those anticipated new regulations ahead of when they're actually mandated. And you can see in many industries differentiation among that type of company and the type of company who just implements to the letter of the law the day after the law, whatever it may be, goes into effect. So I think that there are not foolproof measures that can be taken, but there are reporting requirements that can be considered that could both send a message as to the behavior that is expected and also, in a practical sense, hold the company accountable to a standard that you collectively may wish it to be held to account to.
This is sort of an inchoate question, but I'm trying to, and maybe I missed something at the beginning, and if I did, forgive me, but I'm trying to reconcile the kind of language about bribery with the reality, the day-to-day reality. There are many countries where, out there, where you can't get a driver's license, you can't get a building permit, you can't avoid a traffic ticket. I mean, you can't do anything without what we would call a bribe, but in those cultures are basically a cost of doing business. I don't know whether it's considered a bribe or not in the way that we consider a bribe, but it's simply impossible to do any business without some kind of extra legal compensation to the official in place. And I just can't imagine how a company can do business in that environment where that's just the order of the day, without greasing palms all over the place to do business? And how, is that just, am I wrong on that? Can you go into these really impoverished countries with very little rule of law, no culture of performance standards or ethics or anything, and achieve a standard of no bribery and do business? Or we are kidding ourselves, and you just sort of have to go along to get along, and we're all winking?
Okay. So I think the question is a good practical question. I would say, first of all, the problem of corruption is one that is well documented, and Transparency International, among other organizations, publishes an annual list of countries in which it attempts to rank the relative propensity or susceptibility to corruption in that particular country. Typically, economically more challenged countries have a higher level of incidence of this type of problem because of the inability to pay government officials with sufficient frequency or with sufficient funds. And that's usually a function fundamentally of the inadequacy of the government with respect to its tax collection capability. So having said all of that, it's clear that there is a challenge every day in respect of what you have described. I think what most companies try very hard to do is to avoid the kind of payments you're referring to when it comes to any significant business decision. So with respect to contracts with vendors or with customers, with respect to customs clearance procedures, these are significant elements of business dealing that the company really should work extremely hard to avoid getting into trouble over. As you say, on a one-on-one basis, there can arise situations where just to get something done, you may need to give a gift. I forget who it was who famously said all gifts are bribes, but we use euphemisms such as gift in order to cover our tracks in this regard. But I think the notion is that if there is anything that is fundamental to the performance or the dealing of the business, that it should be avoided. But in addition to that, I know that companies work very hard to educate their employees on how to avoid dealing with the kind of challenge that you rightly highlight in the manner that you suggest is inevitable. And there are ways in which that can be done in terms of the provision of technical support, which I referred to earlier. It could be in the provision of some community contribution that is dispersed among many people rather than directed at a single recipient. So these are not perfect ways of dealing with the ethical challenge that you mentioned, but they at least attempt to reduce the one-on-one reciprocity, which is kind of fundamental to the way in which we think of an unethical bribe.
Yeah, interesting.
Just building off of that, though, a little bit, is there other ways that foreign governments try to disguise the bribe, i.e., it's not as kind of sinister and, back alley-ish of, slip me an envelope, but, gee, all of a sudden my permit fees went up exponentially.
Sure.
And the government official, takes his little piece off the top from
Yeah, I
some
mean, it's,
exorbitant fee.
it's important to, it really is important to understand that the FCPA and the UK Bribery Act, even to a greater degree, really prevent a company from using or hiding behind third-party agents as a way of delivering a favor. And the laws in question are quite open-ended with respect to allowing for many, many ways in which that favor could be transmitted. In other words, it's a very general statement that would that the scenario that you present would not be excluded from being covered by that legislation.
And we also know Dr. Quelch has a 10 o'clock stop point. Anybody else? Anything urgent? Well, this is fascinating, and we really appreciate your time and help for giving us a little window into this interesting world.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Appreciate
Thank
the
you,
opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right, item 3 on the agenda, approval of minutes. Commissioner McHugh. Thank you
The
very much,
minutes
Dr. Welch.
of the,
Thank you.
Thank you.
let's just wait for a second, Mr. Chair. The minutes for the November 21, 2013 meeting are in the packet. They were late additions to the packet. They're there. I would move their adoption, subject to correcting any mechanical or typographical errors they contain.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? Looked fine to me. All in favor of adoption?
Aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Item number 4, Ombudsman Ziemba. While you start, I'm going to get a cup of coffee, but please go ahead.
Sounds great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. By way of general update, there are 3 host community hearings for the Category 2 applicants this week, tonight through Thursday. We've submitted questions to each one of those applicants that may be asked over the next couple of nights. Those will be included in the commissioners' packets for each of the different hearings. One item, we asked each applicant to estimate about 15 minutes of opening remarks, and based on the number of questions that we presented to those applicants beforehand, we've had a request to extend that 15-minute estimate to 25 minutes. I said that we would certainly be accommodating, but I would mention it to the commissioners this morning, so I don't know if the commissioners have any thoughts about that.
Is that so that the applicants can address some of the questions in their opening remarks rather than in response to specific questions we ask them?
Exactly.
Yeah. Strikes me if they want to do that, it's a good idea.
I agree.
So let's go ahead and do it.
Okay, thank you. Second item of general update, on November 27th, we received an agreement that was reached between the town of Attleboro and Penn National, and among other things, it outlined Penn National's obligation to pay for certain public safety expenses that may be incurred by the town of Attleboro. What's noteworthy is Attleboro was not designated as a surrounding community in the application, nor did it submit a surrounding community petition to be so designated. The applicant has told the commission that this agreement should not be construed as a surrounding community agreement pursuant to the statute and the regulations. And I guess that brings to mind, a question that we have received regarding these types of agreements. There are other agreements that have been reached between the Raynham Park applicant and communities and they're deemed nearby community impact agreements. And when we take a look at the statute and the regulations on how these agreements should be construed, on the one hand, I don't believe that there's anything in the statute that prohibits applicants from reaching agreements or contracts with any parties, including surrounding communities. However, a contrary viewpoint is that the statute just clearly specifies only one type of agreement with communities, and that's a surrounding community agreement. For guidance, we take a look at Section 17A of the statute, which is, it basically says that after review of the entire application and any independent evaluations, the commission shall identify which communities shall be designated as surrounding communities, provided, however, any community that has negotiated a surrounding community memorandum of understanding with the applicant that was submitted with the application shall be considered a surrounding community by the commission. And I think that there are some important words that I don't think that we further defined, that any applicant that has negotiated or any community has negotiated a surrounding community memorandum shall be determined to be a surrounding community. I'm not sure that limits the ability of applicants to reach agreements with communities, even though that they don't believe those communities have impacts that'll rise to the level of a significant and adverse standard as called by our regulation. But Council Blue and I have had a number of different discussions, and I think that there are a couple of ways of looking at it.
And I think, given the number of agreements we have that fall into this category, it's a good time to take a more in-depth look at that and look at the statute and the regs and determine whether there's a way to view them one way or the other. There certainly is nothing in the statute that prohibits applicants from entering into other agreements with other communities should they choose to. The question is, how are they characterized under our statute? So we will take a closer look at that and provide the commission with more information.
I have a general question that maybe guides, other questions or how we think about it. Would it be fair to say that those communities that are entering into a nearby community agreement understand the difference between surrounding community and everything else that the statute may or may not afford them?
Specifically in the Raynham Park agreements, there's a specific section that says that they understand that they are not a surrounding community for the purposes of the statute, and that there are not significant and adverse impacts that would rise to the level of a designation. Now, the difference between a designated surrounding community and one of these impacted communities pursuant to these other types of agreements, there are a couple of important provisions in the Act. First of all, surrounding communities are given an automatic place to participate in the community hearings that we'll be having, the host community hearings. But I think that we have taken the stance that even if a community is not the designated surrounding community that can speak to the commission as part of the surrounding community portion of the agenda, as long as it has the nexus to the site, there is nothing that we have said that prohibits those communities from speaking to the commission as a member of the general public, even though that they are not a designated surrounding community. And we've submitted notices of upcoming hearings to communities that, in fact, have since been designated as not surrounding communities. But there are other provisions under the Act that could have an impact on surrounding communities, notably by surrounding communities can participate in the advisory committees and the community mitigation funds. And surrounding communities, by statute, have a place to get funds from the community mitigation fund. We have, through our regulation, stated that just because you are not a surrounding community, that doesn't mean that you cannot go and apply to us for funds. So there are some differences, but I wouldn't state that there are overwhelming differences between the two, especially since we have liberalized the standard for the community mitigation fund.
I think we should deal with this, and I think we should deal with it the sooner the better, because it seems to me that whether or not this is a permissible form of agreement is something that may play itself out and may be playing itself out right now in negotiations between applicants and communities. It also seems to me that the notion that we would prohibit parties from coming to an agreement of whatever dimension they wanted, because it doesn't fit within the categories in the statute, is a hard one to swallow. It may be useful to have a regulation or a practice or a policy statement or something that would require the agreement, a nearby community agreement, call it what you will, to contain an express disclaimer, to show this is a complicated area, and to have communities recognize in the agreement, and therefore focus through themselves or through council on the advantages that they would get if they were surrounding communities, and that they are giving up by not being surrounding communities, and so state in the agreement. But having done that, it seems to me that as a policy matter, we ought to lean in the direction of allowing people to do whatever they want. Peace is a good thing, and these would be peaceful resolutions of controversy. So, but I do think, however we do it, we ought to do it quickly.
Yeah, I was going to sort of take even a little bit stronger position. It's not clear to me why we would be worried about this at all. I mean, in the instant case, they do specify that it's not a surrounding community. So that is included in the case we're now talking about. I'm not sure, and this is not a rhetorical question, this is a question. Why would we be concerned that an applicant wants to sign some other kind of an agreement with other communities? If there were an issue, and maybe if there were an issue about subterfuge, if they were being tricked into it, not realizing they were giving something up, that would be something else altogether, but that's not what we're talking about here. So it seems to me, I don't understand exactly why we would be worried about this at all. Why are we troubled by this?
I just think that there's just been a general question that we've tried to resolve as staff of how we should deal with these. We've taken a look at our regulations to see how we can accept agreements beyond certain dates, and obviously if applicants are reaching agreements with communities, one would expect that potentially you could get credit in our reviews of the applications, even though that those agreements do not rise to the level of a surrounding community agreement.
Yeah.
So perhaps we might need to take a look at our provisions so that we can accept those agreements for the purposes of, giving due credit to applicants as part of their review.
But I wouldn't even think that would be the issue. We clearly can accept those. I mean, we accept letters from people on the street, we accept letters from businesses, we accept letters from chambers of commerce. Obviously, we would accept letters, and we clearly established that relationships with the little s, surrounding community, neighboring communities, is one of the things we do care about. That will matter in the evaluation process. So, I mean, I would think we should, to the extent there's an issue, I would think, why don't we, I would suggest that we make it clear now that we're wholly supportive of such things, do recommend. I mean, we also have had a very standoffish position about mucking around with the local issues. This has been something that's meant to be up to the local communities and to the applicants to the maximum extent possible. Maybe we make a point of recommending that such agreements acknowledge the surrounding community status, the lack of the awareness, the mutual awareness of the surrounding community issue, but beyond that we welcome such things or encourage such things. Does anybody disagree with that?
I'd be in favor of that.
Yeah.
I would be as well.
Okay, thank you. Another issue, we've recently,
Is you okay with that?
Yeah, if some of these neighboring community agreements may come up, seeing the development, I think, around the Lemonster project of these, mutual aid, or, we'll reimburse another town if their fire truck has to go to something on the premises. I think that's fine and good to have a simple agreement to say we'll reimburse you for that without going to the extent of being designated a surrounding community, as long as the community is aware of what that designation means. I think you've sewn it all up.
I think both Council Blue and I agree that it's a matter within our interpretation.
Okay.
At the last meeting, given the length of a few of our last meetings, I didn't properly thank the MAPC for all of their efforts in helping to review the Milford applicant. They spent a tremendous amount of time looking through all of the studies and did tremendous studies on their own to try to assess those impacts to get ready for our reviews. And, of course, we saw the results of the election, the referendum, but I'd be remiss if I didn't thank them.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too, because they were subject, as we have been, but that's what we're supposed to be doing. They were subject to some very unprofessional, very unseemly attacks for trying to do their job appropriately, and they hung right in there. And I would absolutely second that. And I hope we make a point of saying to Director Mark Drazen and to Joelle that we really appreciate that. We went out of our way to comment on that, because there were attacks on them that had no business taking place, and they stuck right with us and tried to do their job, did do their job as best they possibly could. So I appreciate your making that point.
Another general item, we've recently received some correspondence from Long Meadow. Long Meadow is obviously in the midst of negotiations with MGM. As we've mentioned, we try to respect negotiations as much as we possibly can. There are parameters within the Gaming Act that gives a lot of authority to locals. However, there are some concerns that were raised in there that have some implications to our regional planning agency process. There were comments that the look-back proposal that is being identified by MGM runs contrary to the spirit of the Gaming Act and what we're trying to achieve here. And since that letter, we've had conversations with both the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission that is helping conduct that regional traffic study, and also with the applicant MGM regarding what is meant by the look-back proposal. I think the commission in previous meetings has expressed some support of having provisions in agreements where you could, at some point later on, look back at actual impacts and try to mitigate to those impacts. But I think what we've also stated is that to the extent that impacts are either known or knowable at this point, that the party should try to negotiate those impacts at this point. And as we go forward with the traffic impact study, there'll be some results potentially as early as December 10th, and we just anticipate that those could be part of the conversations between the parties when they negotiate these agreements. And I believe that MGM also understands that, and we're going to carry forward under that approach.
I'd like to second that one too. I think the look-back idea is a very good one in many instances, and as a sort of a general principle, I think is a very appropriate, but not to the exemption of understandable, predictable, knowable issues now, clearly. And that really would be an abuse of the look-back notion to be dismissive of current things. So I completely agree with that. I think
But again, and I don't disagree with that so far as it goes, but I would not want the implication to come from this that if an applicant and a town mutually agreed on a host community, a surrounding community agreement that contained just look-back provisions and did it freely, that we would not.
No, totally, I agree.
I just
Right.
want
Yes,
to make that clear.
Yep, I agree.
And these communities are represented by council, so that
Right.
they're in the midst of
Right.
active negotiations. And but to the degree that anything was confusing regarding how we have put forward our support of a look back, I thought it bore some explanation.
Thank you.
General update on surrounding community negotiations. We would have conversations with all of the applicants and with at least one or more of the communities since the designation letters were sent out. We recently sent out the notices of the designation to all those communities that achieved surrounding community status as a result of the petitions, and those that were currently outstanding but had not reached agreements. There is a December 26th deadline for communities to reach a negotiated settlement. If they cannot reach a negotiated settlement by December 26th, then they move forward toward our arbitration procedure. I would note that our arbitration procedures do allow parties by mutual agreement to enter into arbitration at an earlier date if they believe that their negotiations would not be fruitful. Again, that's by mutual agreement, but that's an option. And as we start taking a look at some of the deadlines and how they would carry forward well into the new year, if communities and applicants are at a place where they know that there's nothing left to do before the end of that 30 days, that there's no possible way of them reaching agreement, then perhaps they could take a look at this option. But in the general premise that we really encourage applicants and communities to reach a mutual agreement, because with any arbitration, there is going to be at least one loser to the arbitration, if not both, given that this is an adversarial process. So we encourage all applicants and communities to reach negotiated settlements, but to the degree that there's an impossibility, that there is that procedure in our regulations.
Just roughly how many communities are for each of the applicants undergoing negotiations, active negotiations at this point?
So we have the two that were designated, Bolton and Bridgewater. Bolton for the Cordish proposal, Bridgewater for the Raynham proposal. Also for Raynham, Middleborough, West Bridgewater, and Easton all remain, and Foxborough remains for the Plainville applicant.
Say it again, John. Say it again.
So for Cordish, it's Bolton. For Raynham, it's Bridgewater, Middleborough, West Bridgewater, and Easton. And then Foxborough for the Plainville facility.
And can you give us a sense of, where do you think those are at? I mean, because what we need to get real here now about the deadlines. We've had a deadline where we expected to make the announcement on the slots parlor on January 9th or 10th. In order for that, but we've always said, subject to the possible delays by surrounding communities and applicants not be able to agree. If, in order to make that deadline, all the surrounding community agreements would have to be concluded by December 10th, which is long before the end of these two 30-day cycles. So any community and applicant that do not have an agreement done by December 10th is causing the entire awards process to start to slip. And slip to we don't know when, because we don't know when in this 60-day, 30-day cycle, these agreements will eventually be done. So can you give us a sense about where you think we are? And are there any communities that simply there's no progress being made, and they might be well advised to go straight to the arbitration process?
Some of the recent conversations that I've had have indicated to me that communities are in a place that they want to continue having those conversations. For example, in the Plainville situation, I believe that a meeting is going to be scheduled this week or early next week in order to progress those conversations. The Cordish proposal, there's been information shared between the applicant and the community just recently, and hopefully that is progressing conversations. And then for the Raynham applicant, there have been some attempts to schedule meetings just recently, given some folks may be out of the country or other places. They may not be as successful this week in getting some of those meetings, but they know that there's some very pressing deadlines ahead. So I think that there's still definitely some room for optimism for these conversations, but especially as we get towards the end of next week or the following week, we're going to run out of time, obviously, before the holidays. So the key weeks, in my mind, are this week and next week.
Next week, right. And I just want to make sure that I assume they do, but I want to make sure that the applicants and the community, but there's two sides to this. If folks are negotiating in good faith, and there are difficult issues here, and people are sharing information and negotiating in good faith and trying to move this along, fine. That's important. The law provides this process, that's fine. If it delays the process, if it delays our award, we'll live with that. But if they're not sharing data and not negotiating in good faith, one party or the other is being obstructionist, everybody's schedule is getting screwed up here. You know, our evaluation process, you know this, but I want the public to know this, our evaluation process can be, but for the surrounding community agreements, can be concluded in order to make in time to make the award by January 9th or 10th. We've been all working our evaluation processes, you know, at great length and great intensity to be done. So it's gonna only be a surrounding community and an applicant that can't get the deal done that's gonna make everybody have to wait on the slots part. And if it's good faith, fine, we'll live with that. But if it isn't, then I think we should do everything in our power to push them into arbitration and just get this over with.
And I would only actually highlight to that point, only one surrounding community and an applicant would delay everybody else. It's not like we can go ahead with the other two applicants if, let's say, if they were done with all their surrounding community agreements. The problem you highlight arise just by one negotiation being delayed into arbitration or bad faith negotiations.
There are thousands of construction jobs. There's money to the Commonwealth. There's all these communities that are trying to figure out, are we going to get this or not? There's people who work at a racetrack that don't know whether they're coming or going. I mean, on and on. So delay is in nobody's interest unless it absolutely has to be in good faith. And I hope you'll convey that in no uncertain terms to all the participants.
I plan to be a constant reminder of that.
I'm sure you
in
have.
the next few
This
weeks.
wasn't directed at you. This was directed at your constituents. But I feel, needless to say, I feel strongly about this. Okay, go ahead, excuse me.
One other item that we'll have to approach over the next week or so is what parameters should exist for the arbitrations? What instructions do we put forward to the arbitrators? As we discussed at the November 21st meeting, we were asking the arbitrators to be guided by what the commission found. They're not limited to what the commission found, especially in some of those surrounding community determinations as we discussed at that November 21st meeting. But we will need to put forward basically sort of an instruction manual of how arbitrators should approach the issue of, here's what the Gaming Act says, here's what our regulations state, here's what we're trying to achieve in reaching a fair and reasonable result. Obviously, it's up to the arbitrators to reach that reasonable result, but we can put forward some further advice. For example, one thing that we will have to approach is we've received a question regarding what is a best and final offer. Our regulations just require each the applicant and the community to put forward their best and final offer, and then that is what is arbitrated. But how do you deal with if an offer was made prior to the arbitration? How do you approach that? Is that considered part of the arbitration? Can parties reference that as fairness? And I think what we should do is we should take a look at how things have been approached in other arbitrations. I think our best and final arbitration is modeled after things that have occurred in Major League sports. And as I understand it, some of those, if you have an offer that was made prior to arbitration, that is precluded from part of the conversation. But I think we always intended that each party put forward their best and final offer. That's what our regulations states. But what conversations can occur in arbitration in order for arbitrators to reach that result? I don't know, Council Blue, if you have any other thoughts on that.
Well, I think the concept would be that the parties put out an offer at the time the arbitration takes place. I don't believe we can necessarily limit what information they share with the arbitrator. They may be able to share information regarding prior negotiations or prior offers. I don't think that the arbitrator can really take that into account except as it informs its judgment in general about the situation. But we can certainly put some guidance together for that and make sure that the arbitrator has a consistent set of rules and policies.
Well, I think we should, if we're going to go down this road, rather than leave the arbitrator to his or her own approach to it, we need to have something written out that we all take a look at. I don't think, and I I haven't read the regulation recently. You have much more recently than but I don't think it's exactly the same as baseball arbitration in that the arbitrator isn't limited to one
Yeah.
offer or the other.
Yeah.
And that puts, I don't think, and that puts an overlay on what we do with best and final offer and how binding that is on the arbitrator or the parties. So it would be helpful to have some guidelines for the arbitrator or some background for the arbitrator maybe. But I think we need to be really careful as to how we draft that, and I know we will be.
Yeah, and I wasn't intending to provide basically an instruction manual. I think we have to depend on the professionalism of the arbitrators that are selected. Our regulations have a very fair way of selecting those arbitrators, but to the extent that some of these arbitrators may not have a familiarity with the Gaming Act,
Right.
that's something I think we should just let them know about.
Right.
Well, should we talk about and decide now whether the best and final being independent of anything in the past?
Well, I think we would, something from legal first would be helpful,
All right.
that really spells out the regulation and the intent, and then we'd be able
Okay.
to have a more informed discussion.
Okay,
I agree with that.
that's fine. We're also, okay.
Sorry for the random grouping of issues that we're putting forward.
No, these are all issues. They're
But things
important.
are
Right.
moving forward rather quickly,
Right.
as you know. Okay, then let me just move forward on item C, 4C, the petition deadline for Category 1 surrounding community and live entertainment venues. The commission had a recent discussion regarding the status of each one of the applicants. So the Category 1 applicants, they came and made presentations to us on November 7th, I believe, about where they stood with each one of their, conversations with their communities, surrounding communities and neighboring communities. And there's questions on where do we stand with the December 31st deadline for surrounding community petitions, and I guess the December 31st deadline for applications. And so that remains a question. I will just bring to your, remind us all of a few things that might have an impact on that discussion. And then potentially we could discuss whether or not it makes sense to have a comment period on the current deadline. One thing that is in our regulations is that, as you know, surrounding communities within 10 days of the application date, they must submit their surrounding community petition to the commission. What we anticipated in our regulation is that there would be availability of the applications by the applications to those surrounding communities when they file their petitions. Our recent experience with Category 2s show that it's very valuable information that that communities need when they submit their petitions to us, and whether or not they may be successful in their approach. We are trying to see to get our information out as quickly as possible, the applications out as quickly as possible. However, it may not come as early as we hope within that, and it may not occur within that 10-day period, depending on the complexity of these applications. We have an administrative review for completeness, and that completeness review may actually not conclude until after the 10th. So there's a possibility that some communities would not have access to the application data in order to make their petitions. Now, we have provisions in our regulations that allow for communities to get access to those applications if they so choose. For example, on our host community webpage, all that communities need to do is they need to send an email to the commission saying, I want to receive copies of studies and reports, and then we then require those the applicants to submit those studies to the communities when they submit the applications to us. And we expanded that from just the studies that are included in the Gaming Act to include non-private portions of their application. However, today, a very de minimis number of communities have signed up for that process. We've sent out a couple of reminders, but I don't blame the communities because we sent out a lot of reminders. So we could potentially send out another reminder, and we will, of the availability of that, but at the end of the day, we may not have a tremendous number of communities that have signed up for that. So that's one thing I mentioned. We could also potentially consider expanding our requirement of applicants to submit copies of those non-private portions of the applications to a greater number of communities, perhaps all geographically adjacent communities, even though clearly all geographically adjacent communities are not necessarily surrounding communities, but for the purposes of enabling these communities to receive copies of the applications, that might make some sense. One other item to consider is that over the next couple of weeks, there's a number of significant reports for all three of the applicants that will become available. And given the holiday time and given the tight timetable between now and December 31st, it may be difficult for some of these communities to fully integrate these studies into their thinking when they're reaching these agreements. And that might potentially lead to a thought of an extension, even an extension that is more close in the number of days to what we did for Category 2s. For example, in the wind resorts, their draft environmental impact report is due, I believe, on December 16th. I note that our requirements do not require a draft environmental impact report, but WIN in its representations to us and to other communities noted how important that would be for understanding impacts. There's also a couple other studies, a transportation improvement initiative and a water transportation system. Conversations are ongoing with communities about those, but those are going to be available more widely over the next few days. The Suffolk Downs applicant, as we know, or former applicant, we know that there's a lot of conversations regarding their plan and what their revised plan would be, so communities may not be able to understand the impacts. And then finally with MGM, their transportation report is due on the 10th of December, and they have not yet released their economic impact study. So they're all a number of different reasons for potential requests for comment.
So are you making a recommendation, or are you just laying out the options?
I can make a recommendation if you want me to.
Well, I'd be interested to know what you think.
I think we should have a request for comment about an extension. There are a number of different reasons that an extension, certainly not the extension that was requested by a number of the Palmer-related communities of 180 days. I just don't think that's a possibility within what we're trying to achieve here. But there could potentially be a short extension, and we could potentially still live within all of the expectations that are being put upon us by the legislature and by others for revenues being made available to the Commonwealth in jobs and all the things that we've talked about. If we extended the deadline by 17 days for Category 1, that is comparable to the 16-day extension that we did for Category 2. We would still, based on my initial analysis, if everything goes right, we could still receive our licensing fees by June 27th, 3 days before the deadline for receipt of those licensing fees. That does not leave us with any margin of error. And I bring this to everyone's attention because our ability to grant extensions to any dates, absent some change by the legislature and their expectations of dollars, is really minimal. There's some potential that you could have some payback to the Commonwealth after the June 30th deadline, but that's not a tremendously permissive authority. So when people look to the Commission to ask for extensions of deadlines, there really is not that much that the Commission has singly within its own power to grant. And what I've outlined to you of this basically 2-week extension or shortly after that would test the limits of that authority.
Would that timeline take into account at least potentially one set of parties going into arbitration?
That's, yes,
So even if you call it, everything goes right,
Yes.
that would still be within the confines of allowance for negotiation plus arbitration.
yes.
And how much time does that 17-day extension in your schedule allow for the commission to make the decisions on who's a surrounding community or not?
So what we would have under the 17-day variance, instead of January 10th for a submission of the surrounding community petitions, the deadline would be January 27th. We would receive applicant responses to surrounding community petitions on February 6th from applicants. And then 12 days later, the commission would meet to discuss those petitions and the responses. And it would have to make that designation on that day in order to enable we couldn't wait a few days after the decision by the commission to send out the written designations. It would have to occur on that day to enable communities to then go forward to the negotiation process.
So that would be February
18th.
18th, and then 60 days beyond that would be
That's
March,
right.
April. How did you get to June?
So I'll just take you through the timetable, and I think this is correct. So February 18th, the commission designates the surrounding communities, and this would be both petitioning communities and those that are designated in the application, consistent with our practice for Category 2. Thus, communities that have been designated would also have just a little bit more time to negotiate if we have them at the same schedule as with those that have successfully petitioned the commission. Our current plan is that we would have hearings in the host community on March 17th to the 19th. These are the host community hearings, but they would be concluded only after agreements are reached so that they could be held open until April 28th, which is 7 days after surrounding community arbitration. So 218 we designate, 218 to 320, that's when surrounding communities would negotiate with the applicants. 321 to 421, that's the arbitration period. 428, that's we finish the hearings in the host communities. And then 528, because we cannot make an award until 30 days after the close of those hearings, that's when we would be able to take action on the gaming license. And then applicants have 30 days from the decision to pay us our licensing fees. That takes us to June 27th.
I see, okay. Well, go ahead, please, sir.
Well, I, for one, would be very reluctant to extend the deadline at this point anyway. But for the instances that you described relative to studies being imminent about being available, I think there are great success cases already in the Category 2s. There's templates out there of what they were able to negotiate and have agreed upon. And frankly, the field has narrowed in both regions A and B. So applicants should be a lot more incentivized, in my opinion, but as well as surrounding communities as well, to sit down and look at the impacts that they know and think about what impacts they don't know and try to hash something out. So
I would agree. I'm a little reluctant to make that extension also. I mean, we've had two applicants who had their referendums passed back in June. I mean, we're coming up on the 6-month anniversary of that. It's, we've obviously encouraged dialogue between applicants and surrounding communities. We've encouraged potential surrounding communities to contact applicants. I don't know if we're going to see some big surprises at the end.
I do note that, as Mr. Silverstein told the commission a few weeks ago, that yes, there certainly has been a lot of time between certain referendums and now, but in some regards, the communities have not had some of the information to reach agreements that they would need.
And I echo what Commissioner Zuniga said in the data and the information, any of the ENF documents that can be returned to the surrounding communities. But
I would be reluctant to extend it as well, because I don't think 17 days is going to change anything or be of any material help. I'd rather save that 17 days for extending something else if it's necessary, but under controlled conditions so that we could assure a result that was useful. It seems to me, for example, that if some applicant truly has been stonewalling a community, it might be worthwhile to get the applicant and the community, as we did, and it wasn't a stonewalling case, it was a misunderstanding case or an inability to agree case, as we did with with another applicant and a surrounding, and a community, to get them in here and talk to them face to face and see what the problems are, and then try to come up with a tailored approach to what may solve whatever problem exists, and then, if necessary, give them a little bit of that 17 days in order to do it, rather than simply give a 17-day extension that may or may not really deal with whatever problem exists.
And the other point, I think, is it kind of takes away that sense of urgency. You spoke about these next 2 weeks being big weeks as far as making progress and getting these things done. I think if we push the deadline, that urgency does not exist any longer, and it's probably premature, is what I'm thinking, to consider extending at this point.
I think we have a consensus on this one. You know, it also seems to me, it does seem to me, for whatever reason, good or bad, no matter whose fault it is, that it is perfectly possible that some surrounding community aspirants may not have had time to assess the application and the studies by our deadline. But that doesn't mean they can't submit the request for surrounding community status, and I would encourage any community that feels like it is but hasn't had a chance to submit it. But we will then do that analysis. They don't have to do the analysis. All they have to do is submit the letter. And then we will have our consultants, and we ourselves will do the analysis. So they're not, by not having an extension and by not having a chance to look at the information on their own, they're not compromised in their ability either A, to apply, or B, to get it. Because in the final analysis, it will be we who make the decision, and we will have the studies and the application. So I'm with everybody on this one. I would strongly be disinclined.
One thing I'd like to mention is that if we go with the same policy that we had with Category 2 applicants, the deadline for submission of a negotiated settlement before the 30-day clock ticks would be the end of January. So under the policy right now, if there's a surrounding community petition deadline of January 10th, the commission would receive applicant responses to the petitions on January 21st, and then we would have our public hearings, input hearings on the 28th through the 30th, and then the commission would receive its staff recommendations on surrounding community status, if possible within those 10 days, on the 31st of January. So if we go with the same policy that we did with Category 2s, then before this 30-day negotiation period kicks in, it would be potentially the 31st of January. And so perhaps that's something that we could make much more widely known. We'd love applicants and communities to be able to reach agreements by our deadline, but we'd also really encourage applicants to make designations of surrounding community status where they believe these communities are surrounding communities. And one thing I will note is that we will incur substantial resources and we will expend substantial resources in analyzing these petitions. As you saw from the Category 2 applicants, which will have much less impacts than the Category 1s, it takes a tremendous amount of analysis. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be having those constant conversations that I mentioned a little bit earlier with the applicants, so that we, as a staff and our consultants, can know who we need to analyze, because that 10-day window is, or 10-day with that one, is quick. And And if the commission, we could come back, if the commission so decides, we can certainly come back with how we would amend our policies so that communities get access to those application documents as soon as they can. Because it just, without that data, I just can't see how they would be able to submit quality surrounding community petitions.
But just to be clear, I mean, they don't have to submit quality applications. I mean, they're not judged on the basis of their application. They're judged on the basis of our judgment of the actual impacts. So I don't, I mean, if I'm wrong on this, please say so, because it's an important distinction. But if we are giving surrounding community aspirants license to just sort of do a prophylactic application, that relieves them of tremendous pressure. And we are saying we will take the responsibility, which we ultimately would have anyway, of looking out for their interests through an objective assessment of the actual data. So if that's right, then I think that's an important distinction.
That is right, that is our responsibility, but obviously we are aided by information that is put forward
True.
by the
No,
communities that are experiencing
I agree.
the impacts. This information is valuable to us as well.
Yes, I agree with that. You can also point out to applicants in surrounding communities that the Secretary of Administration and Finance and the Chair of House and Senate Ways and Means Committees will be watching to see who gets done on time. Okay, what's next?
That's what I have in my report.
All right, great, thank you. Well, I was gonna do Mark's report. Because we have a hard, for everybody to know, we have a hard stop at 1 o'clock because the commission has to go to Leominster for its legislatively mandated host committee hearing. In order to get it, our web streaming folks out there, we have to stop at 1 o'clock in order that our vendor can get out there to get set up to stream. So we have to stop at 1. So I don't want to run the risk of not getting your legislative report done, so let's do this. We'll take a very quick break, and then we'll do Suffolk Downs. So this is item number 6, Research and Problem Gaming. Mark Vanderlinden, Director.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners.
Sorry, 1 second.
I think she needs to take a break.
Oh.
Switch something.
Okay.
That's great. I need a cup of coffee.
We'll take another one. Well, all right, so we can
I'm gonna walk to the back and run and come right back.
oh, that's okay.
It's gonna take 2 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, 5 seconds.
Reconvene? Well, we'll have a real break after this. Director Vanderlinden is here to give his report. They're coming. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good morning. So just by way of background, Section 71 of the Gaming Act requires the Massachusetts Gaming Commission to establish an annual research agenda to assist in understanding the social and economic effects of casino gambling in Massachusetts and minimize the harmful impacts. Section 108 then is a statutory requirement to submit a report of research activities conducted under Section 71 no later than 2 years after the effective date of the Act. And so therefore, I present to you in your packets the report of the research agenda of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. As reflected in the report, and as you very well know firsthand, this is a complex and impressive effort, one that I don't think that I've seen done in the United States previously. The Massachusetts legislature should be applauded for including such a mandate within the Gaming Act. The current research agenda, one, utilizes a framework to accurately and comprehensively assess the social and economic impacts of expanded gaming in Massachusetts. It measures the current rates of gambling and problem gambling in Massachusetts, and it inventories the existing treatment and prevention programs. All the current efforts that we're doing right now is intended to establish a baseline of these three areas so that as gaming expands in Massachusetts, we can then continue to measure the impacts and respond accordingly through policy, through treatment initiatives, through prevention initiatives. I wanted to provide an opportunity, obviously, for the Commission to provide comment, to provide questions in advance of submitting this then to the legislature.
One question, Director. I thought this was an excellent summary of where we are and where we intend to go. I just wondered if there were any challenges that had not been anticipated. It seems like every initiative so far, we've had some maybe unintended consequences. Just wondered if there were anything here that you could share, if there are.
Yeah, no, I think there definitely are. There are hurdles that it seems like we encounter every week. I think that doing this accurately, making sure that what we're measuring is what we're intending to measure, that we're getting rid of the background noise on these specific indices to make sure that this is what we're wanting to measure, so that when we go forward with this baseline and that we're continuing to do this accurately and that there's integrity within this process. I do want to acknowledge, and I meant to do this earlier, the Sigma team. They've been fantastic to work with, led by Dr. Rachel Volberg and her team, an incredibly talented group of people that I think are doing just this, that as we move forward, they want to make sure that this is done correctly.
Following up on that question, are there any obstacles or impediments or difficulties of a non-technical nature that the commission could be helpful in removing? Any, for want of a better word, political difficulties or interagency cooperation difficulties or other kinds of things where the commission could put its weight behind finding a solution?
In the 5 months that I've been here, at every step of this, the commission has been fantastic. You, as commissioners, have been fantastic. If there have been barriers of a political nature, of connecting with other agencies, it's been very well received to figure out how can we possibly remove these barriers. There's a lot of different agencies that we're trying to include in this. We're capturing primary data, certainly, especially through our prevalence survey, but we're also trying to coordinate a number of secondary data sources, and that requires the cooperation of countless other agencies. The commission has been great, and when we've had difficulty maneuvering through these to try to remove those barriers.
And you might mention, we had a slow start with HHS and DPH because of all the various things they've been going through in the last year, but we're now off to a really good start with the Department of Public Health. We had a meeting yesterday with Commissioner Cheryl Bartlett, and we're working on an MOU to oversee the management of the Public Health Trust Fund. That's worked really well, and that relationship looks very, very promising. So at the moment, I don't see barriers other than just the magnitude of the job. Commissioner Cameron and our law enforcement people have been really helpful in trying to figure out where we can get the crime information that we need. But other than just the magnitude of the task, I don't see any challenges at the moment.
Just following up on those three comments, actually, I don't know if this is there's a place for this in the report, but acknowledging the amount of resources that we are putting behind this is very important for the legislature to really understand. We put in regulations our ability to assess applicants and eventually licensees up front for the monies that pay for these studies, this study, among other things. And I think they should understand just the amount of effort and finances that are going to this effort. It's not something that that comes across on the executive summary, and I think there's good reason. It's important to highlight the activities, but somewhere, whether it's by way of our ongoing conversations with them, or acknowledgements as an appendix or something like that, could go a long way to frame our effort, not just coordinating with other agencies, but also paying for this very expensive proposition. And worthwhile. I don't want to mention expensive as in not worth it. I think it's very much worth it. And I think that's exactly what the legislature intended us to do. But it's not something that, in my opinion, should go unmentioned somewhere.
I think that's a very good point. I think it would have a place in the executive summary. I mean, I think it's worth saying that the statute envisioned that the Public Health Trust Fund would pay for this research project, but there is no Public Health Trust Fund yet, and the commission has had to, and has willingly, spent whatever it's gonna be, upwards of $3 million or something like that, out of our initial loan from the Rainy Day Fund, an expense which was anticipated by no one when this got started. I think that's a very important point and should be brought to the fore.
Great, I will include that. I think absolutely in the executive summary, as well as then reflected in the full report. It is intended that the executive summary is included in the full report, but that it can also sit separate from the full report as kind of just a summary of our research activities. But I'll be glad to include that. Thank you.
Great.
I think it's a great job. I think everybody feels good about it, feels good about the work that's being done. Does somebody want to take a motion here?
Sure, I'll be happy to. To move that we accept the report as presented here before us and forward that to the relevant subcommittees of the legislature that the Gaming Act provides for, and in compliance with the Gaming Act. Subject to the changes, yeah, the small changes as we discussed here today.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimously. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we are on now to item number 5, which is the Suffolk Downs topic. I am going to suggest that we have a brief break. The agenda will start out with a presentation by representatives of Suffolk Downs on the new status that was presented to the press yesterday. So if Suffolk Downs folks want to avail themselves of the seats, we'll be back in hopefully just 5 or 10 minutes. Commissioner McHugh will be just in a minute, but before we start formally, I just wanted to say one thing about one of our constituent groups that is very much affected by our work, but that we're not too attentive to. We, as you know, we supervise the racing, the commission, the gaming business, and we also supervise the racing business. And as we are dealing, and certainly you all too, are dealing with the issue at Suffolk Downs, there is a whole racing community. Our employees, track employees, but there are a lot of folks out there whose lives are affected by these decisions who simply don't know whether they're going to have jobs next week, whether there's going to be a track. I understand that you all have are doing what you, this is not directed at you at all. This is simply to say that there is a constituent group out there whose lives are very much affected by this. We are not unmindful of this. As many of you know, we have tried to figure out ways that we could be helpful in this transition period. Frankly, there's not much we can do. We will go out of our way for any of you in the horse racing business, and in this case, the thoroughbred racing business, to make our website a source of information where we will give you as much information as we possibly can. I'm sure Suffolk Downs is doing the same thing. But our racing division director, Jennifer Dernberger, reminds us that there is a group of folks out there whose lives depend on what we are doing here, and I just wanted to say to them, we understand, and we're all working as hard as we can to get this resolved. And once it is resolved one way or the other, we will work with representatives of the thoroughbred industry to do what we can to assure a future of thoroughbred and harness-bred racing in this state. Commissioner McHugh is now back. We're going to start out with Representative Suffolk Downs. There are so many of you, we want to make sure our reporter gets your name, so please be sure to introduce yourselves when you start. And I think the topic here is your new structure as you released to the press yesterday, and then we will get on ourselves on some of these other issues.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We too are very mindful of the people about whom you just spoke. And they are one of the big reasons that we are here before you today. My name is Chip Tuttle. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Suffolk Racecourse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, for the opportunity to come back and update you on our status, our partnership with Mohegan Sun, and our status with our host community agreement of Revere. Mindful of everybody's time and your hard deadline, let me tell you who is here with me today, and we'll get right to our presentation. Immediately to my right, Special Counsel Tom Riley, who was with us here before and is back today to give you an update. And then Sterling Suffolk Racecourse Corporate Secretary Charles Baker, Mohegan Sun CEO Mitchell Ettis. Next to Mitchell is Attorney Kevin Conroy, attorney for Mohegan Sun from Foley Hoag. And then, who's next? Brian? Yeah. Oh, Mayor Rizzo, Mayor Dan Rizzo. I thought Brian Falk was here as well. Mayor Dan Rizzo from the city of Revere. Brian must have moved. Brian moved over.
Hard to see.
Yeah. So we'll get started, and as always, we're happy to address and answer any questions that you and any of the commissioners have. Thank you. Tom?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Tom Riley. I'm special counsel to Suffolk. I'm with the law firm of Cooley, Mannion, Jones in Boston. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate this morning. My role is very simple, and I'm very mindful of your time limitations here, is to explain, at least from my perspective, how we got to this point with Mohegan Sun. I see it as an exciting development, very positive, but obviously that's your decision. But I think the most important thing that can happen today is, after you have the opportunity to understand the plan, is to get your feedback, because the most important thing, and I'm sure you share this, is to get this right. It's important to us, it's important to you, and it's certainly important to the region and to the state. About 10 days or maybe a little bit more after the November 5th election, I was asked by Suffolk Downs to take a look at Mohegan Sun in a due diligence sense. In undertaking that assignment, I was very mindful of the gaming statute, particularly the application, which set out a process with two main components. Number one, a host community had voted in favor, and secondly, an applicant that was suitable. They'll speak to it this morning in terms of Revere being the host community. I'll deal with Mohegan, and I'm not going to retrace. You've already found them suitable, so that was not a hard process to get to that. But to me, it was the more I saw it and the more I got into it, it was a perfect alignment of what the statute is seeking to accomplish in terms of a host community and a suitable applicant. Again, I'm not going to dwell on the suitability. You've already found that, had the benefit of the outstanding work of your bureau, your investigative bureau, so it was off to a good start. As you'll hear, the structure is basically the same with not just Mohegan, but that you've already been vetted before you and you're already familiar with in terms of the role of Mohegan, the role of Brigade, and frankly, the role of Suffolk. But this was more than just suitability. We had the benefit, but we wanted to take another look ourselves for obvious reasons that were discussed before in terms of due diligence. And the more I looked at it, there were some things that stood out here. And first of all, Mohegan Sun is New England-based, and I think it's important because they understand this area. They certainly understand the culture of this area, and I think that's important where they're going to be operating. I'm going to go into that, but for obvious reasons, I think you know the importance of that. I'm going to move over certainly the experience and the expertise. They certainly have it, and they have a track record to prove it. But third, what jumped out at me is their size, and in sense of they're large enough to get this project done in an absolutely first-class manner, particularly with the financing with Brigade. But they're not too big to let it get away from them. As I could see it and as I studied them, they are expanding, but very slowly and very carefully. And I think that's wise, and I certainly hope they stay that way. But the main point I want to make here is this, and just my perspective, they were a breath of fresh air, quite frankly, to deal with. David Rome is a class act in terms of, once I got into it, in terms of everything that we have asked for, every document, every record. Frankly, a pain in the neck to move that quickly, but he did. Sunday night, he was bombarding me again with it. And I say that in a good way. Everyone that we've asked to speak to, they're open. Yes, ask them whatever you want. You want us to be there, not be there. Frankly, it's a breath of fresh air. And I have to say the same thing about Brigade. I haven't had the personal experience with them, but dealing with them on the phone, again, the openness, the willingness to cooperate. We're supposed to be down there tomorrow, but I think this will delay that until we can get the records examined. But again, I can't emphasize that, and it's important to me in the following regard. No one's hiding the ball here with either Mohegan or Brigade that I could see for it. And I think that's important because as no one knows better than you, this is a tough business. And things are going to go wrong. There's no question. And you have to build an element of trust that when they go wrong and when problems arise, you're going to have someone here. You don't want to be policing everyone. What you want is to make sure that somebody is playing by the rules, doing their best to play by the rules, and certainly will work with you and other local authorities to make it work. And I got the impression that's exactly what Mohegan is. And I got the impression so far that's exactly what Brigade is, and we're not done yet. So in conclusion, that's my role. I do see it as a positive development, frankly, an exciting development as you start dealing with the folks at Mohegan and dealing with them with some distance with Brigade. It's frankly been a pleasure. But I'll just close with this, that I think the most important thing today, or however much time, to get your feedback. This is important. It's important to us. As I said, it's important to the region. It's important to the state. We want to get it. We want to get it right. So your help in accomplishing that goal will go a long way. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for, again, giving us the opportunity to appear before you. Mr. Chairman, as I think the commission may recollect, prior to our appearance...
Just your name, Charlie.
Charlie Baker, as Corporate Secretary of Suffolk County. Prior to our appearance before you on November 21st, 2013, Karen Wells, Director of the Bureau, appeared before you. One question you asked her was whether all the applicants were aware that there would be no time for additional suitability reviews before December 31st, and she answered in the affirmative. Needless to say, we had been in discussions with both Karen and Catherine. We were aware of that. But where that leads us to is that we were aware that in order to find a suitable gaming partner, we needed to deal with somebody who you had already found suitable. That created, as you might expect, a relatively short list of candidates, but you know, happily for us, it created a quality list of candidates. As Suffolk began to negotiate with the Mohegan Sun team, it became clear to us that from a cultural standpoint, there is a good fit in terms of vision, goals, and commitment. As we collectively began to lay out a potential partnership structure, it became apparent that given the fact that the Mohegan had a deal structure developed for the Palmer project with their source of capital brigade that was already vetted by the commission and provided a mechanism to ensure adequate sources of capital and financeability, to the extent that we could replicate that structure, it would expedite our business agreements. Given the looming December 31st, 2013 RFA2 deadline, utilizing that existing structure was compelling. Therefore, under agreement, as in Palmer, Mohegan will be the applicant, as Sterling Suffolk's tenant, and will also be the developer, operator, and applicant of the gaming establishment, as that term is defined in Chapter 23K. Yesterday, we supplied the relevant binding agreement to the IAB as a privileged and confidential document. The details of that agreement are obviously before you, but let me just describe what those documents basically demonstrate. What those documents demonstrate is the following. This is a classic landlord-tenant ground lease relationship. It's the tenant's responsibility to build, maintain, and operate the gaming establishment, to permit the project, and to construct what has been, what we hope you will find favorably you approve. So they'll build what ultimately is submitted to you, and if we earn your trust that you guys support. Separately, Sterling Suffolk Racecourse, the landlord, will maintain the property necessary to operate and conduct a racing meeting in the remaining portions of the property. As it relates generally to the questions you have posed to General Counsel Blue, prior to our announcement with Mohegan Sun, we supplied a joint brief yesterday. I know, however, that one specific question General Counsel Blue has been asked by you, which he has raised with me, is what is the status of the racetrack? Our answer is straightforward. Our commitment to maintain the racetrack remains the same as it was 10 days ago or 10 years ago. Contemporaneous with the RFA2 process, we will submit to the Racing Division of the Gaming Commission our plans and progress to find a suitable stabling area and to receive the necessary approvals and permissions from this commission and the City of Boston to continue to operate New England's remaining thoroughbred racetrack. As you are also aware, the revenue provided by 23K is essential to the financial ability of that operation.
When you say we, who's we?
Who's we?
We-
Sterling Suffolk Racecourse LLC
Okay.
will supply to the Racing Division, our regulators of Racing Commission, our plan to find a stabling area and to maintain the racetrack in the existing footprint.
I just want to make sure.
Right.
who he is.
Right. So the we for the racetrack is Sterling Suffolk Racecourse LLC. The we for the gaming applicant is the person I'm going to introduce. So.
Thank you very much. Mitchell Ettis, the Chief Executive Officer of the Mohegan Tribal Gaming Authority. Thank you, Commissioner Crosby. Other commissioners, I want to acknowledge that we have Aaron Daniels from Brigade back here with us, as long as David Rome. And of course, this is Kevin Conroy, Mohegan Sun's outside counsel, who's been so helpful to us through all of our dealings with you all. It might be one of the biggest understatements ever to say that a lot's happened since we were last here for our suitability hearing here in October, but it's a pleasure to be here again. Mohegan Sun and Suffolk Downs both began our pursuit of our place in the Massachusetts gaming industry in different ways and in different locations. Challenging circumstances have brought us together in recent days. Mohegan Sun was extremely disappointed. I cannot tell you, with all the time and energy and we put into Palmer, how disappointed we were by the referendum results, and it was very tough for us. But as we've kind of come to thought, perhaps fate here has prevailed, and we've come to recognize that something truly special can be created in Revere. We believe that Revere is the ideal site for the Region A Category 1 resort license. Last Wednesday, Suffolk Downs, Mohegan Sun, and Brigade entered into an agreement, and we provided the Commission with that agreement yesterday. As part of this agreement, our relationship with Brigade that was discussed as part of the Mohegan Sun suitability hearing remains exactly the same. I think this gives us the strongest financial platform of any of the Massachusetts gaming license applicants because of Brigade. $15 billion investment advisor with extensive experience in the gaming industry. This ensures our ability to deliver a billion-dollar project for Revere. Our partnership with Suffolk Downs is built on our respective strengths and histories. Suffolk Downs brings 78 years of history in the community and region, great support of the host community of Revere, institutional relationships and local credibility built upon decades of being a good neighbor. And they also have a true commitment to working with us to bring resort casino to Revere that will be the most prominent project in the Massachusetts gaming industry. Mohegan Sun is the region's leading gaming brand and the best in the industry at delivering the resort gaming experience that will drive visitation to this region. Mohegan Sun brings to this project a tremendous marketing advantage through our strength and regional brand awareness and our incredible database of loyal guests who visit our resorts in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Atlantic City. By leveraging our brand and our existing marketing database, we can begin engaging customers immediately on the resort casino project in Revere, and this provides quicker revenues and significant advantage to the Commonwealth. Because of the strengths that I've mentioned, and because of all three partners have been found suitable by this commission, our project in Revere has become the strongest proposal in Eastern Mass. Obviously, in a short period of time, we've been working feverishly, almost nonstop, in creating design elements, gaming program, entertainment, other amenities that will be featured in our casino project in Revere. Now, because of the time frame, I can't give you a tremendous amount of details on that, but I can tell you that the project will be very unique and a signature project for the region. We are going to create something that not only serves a regional gathering place, but will be a national and international tourist destination. I mean, it has that wow that someone that comes to the greater Boston area will want from out of state or out of country will have to see as part of their visit here. It's going to draw from our expertise in Connecticut and in Pennsylvania, and it came very clear to me after spending the day in Revere that it's going to have to hearken and draw inspiration from the great history of Revere Beach, and there's no question that has to be woven into the feeling that you get when you visit this property. The project's going to create 2,500 construction jobs and 4,000 permanent jobs, with preference given to Revere residents. And although time is short, we are excited about the RFA2 application that we're crafting for submission to the Commission on December 31st. Both Mohegan Sun and Suffolk Downs had been putting together excellent RFA2 applications with the opportunity to merge the best ideas of both applications. We obviously had done a lot of work. It's going to be a tight deadline, but we had put so much into it from our side, and Suffolk, we can combine those things and make an excellent presentation for you. Suffolk Downs has some great ideas about workplace diversity and responsible gaming. Then our RFA2 application will be better because of their involvement. And lastly, regarding Revere, I had the pleasure yesterday of getting to know Mayor Rizzo, and I got to see a tour of Revere and introduced to a lot of the local business folks there, town council meeting for the zoning hearing. I've been amazed by the excitement and support for this casino in Revere. Honestly, it was truly overwhelming my day yesterday. I can't even begin to describe it to you. I've assured the mayor that Mohegan Sun will honor all the commitments made by Suffolk Downs in its host community agreement with the city of Revere and the amendment to the host community agreement, which I understand is being negotiated right now. Also, we've already begun to work with Suffolk Downs in the process already underway of reaching out for agreements with the surrounding communities. So we're thrilled about the possibilities of our Revere Casino and look forward to our submission of our RFA2 application between now and December 31st, although I don't see too much rest between now and then. With that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Rizzo.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you very much for this opportunity once again to reinforce the city's position on our desire to place a resort-style gaming establishment in Revere. I am joined here today, although not here at the table, by legal counsel for the city of Revere, Brian Falk and Nick Anastasopoulos from Merrick O'Connell, my economic development director, John Festa, and our city solicitor, Paul Capizzi. The city's position has not changed from when I spoke here before you back on November 21st. We're still very, very enthusiastic, and now more enthusiastic given the relationship that's been formed between Suffolk Downs and Mohegan Sun. We have always, as I indicated back on November 21st, wanted to have the development in Revere, and are elated now that Mohegan Sun has forged this partnership and is moving ahead to the extent possible with plans to develop in Revere. On November 5th, Revere voters, almost 6,500 of them, came to the polls in higher numbers, by the way, than they did percentage-wise in the city of Boston, where there was a real mayor's race for the first time in over 2 decades. Percentage-wise, a higher percentage came to the polls to vote for resort gaming at Suffolk Downs by almost a 2-to-1 margin. They came out because of the benefits that they knew that it was going to provide the city of Revere and our region. 2,500 construction jobs, 4,000 permanent jobs at full build-out, transportation improvements, economic development, collateral investment opportunities. These were things that we talked about with our residents for the months leading up to the election, and obviously it resonated with them. Our host community agreement is still in full force and effect. We are working now to amend that agreement to reflect this new change, to move the project over to the Revere-only side, and I'm very confident that within the next week or two, we will have finalized that. Last night at a city council meeting, and I know, Mr. Chairman, this was important to you at the last meeting, where you had asked me about city council support for the project. They have passed a resolution that I believe members of the commission may have, supporting the project once again by a unanimous vote, but for 2 city councilors that were absent for personal reasons. So it continues to not only draw support of our residents, but full unanimous support of our city council. I ask that the commission allow us to move forward and bring this world-class, first-class facility to the Boston region and support the efforts and allow the vote of our community to matter when it comes to bringing resort-style gaming to the city of Revere. Thank you so much.
Commissioners?
Well,
Go ahead.
this is a very attractive proposal in my view, not only because of the nature of this, the substance of the proposal, but because of the array of people who are sitting at the table in front of us, people with whom we've worked and had a chance to see and observe and watch them as they worked to bring this to fruition. But I'm troubled, candidly, by the proposal because of the statutory requirement for a vote that is informed, it seems to me, essentially, by both the summary of the agreement and by the host community agreement itself. There would be no reason, though the vote question is simply a location question, to have a requirement for the summary posted on the website and included on the ballot, and the 60-day provision, at least, for the host community agreement to be posted on the city's website and available to citizens so that they could inform themselves if the contents of those documents were not important, to inform the voters of the consequences of their vote on the specific location. I was troubled when we were together last with the notion that, in part, the facility, the gaming facility, the track facility, notwithstanding the casino's location in Revere, would be in East Boston, a community that had rejected the vote that was put to them on the day that the 2 towns voted. I was troubled by that because under the statute, a racing licensee was required and is required to keep the track on its premises. We had a discussion as to what the word premises meant. I took a careful look at that, Chapter 128A, and respectfully disagree with your interpretation of that, Mr. Baker, and concluded that whether one looked at the track as an amenity or something else, it was one of 2 essential ingredients that the statute requires a Category 1 gaming facility have. One is a hotel, and the other is if it's a racing licensee, a track on its premises. Now, that barrier has been removed because the applicant is not a racing licensee. But it seems to me this proposal now is so far different in so many dimensions from the proposal that the voters had before them when they went to the polls, that it stretches the concept of a knowing community vote beyond recognition. There is, if one takes a look at the agreement, there are a number of things that are in the summary and in the agreement that are no longer present. First of all, the voters have not had an opportunity to vote on Mohegan Sun. They voted on a proposal that was led by people they knew, people who had been in their community for years, people who had gone door to door in their community, people who had presented in both communities themselves as capable operators, as people they could interact with. Though we have found Mohegan Sun suitable, though we believe they are suitable, the voters ultimately need to understand who they are and who it is that's making the commitments that the host community agreement contains. The host community agreement says that the Suffolk Downs racetrack is an important community amenity. The current agreement says that. And its preservation is an essential ingredient or an essential objective of the proposal. But as was said yesterday, the new applicant can't guarantee that. And the new applicant is a separate entity from the entity that will operate the racetrack. And so the kind of guarantee and undertaking that is contained on Suffolk Downs' part in the host community agreement now no longer can be present because the applicant does not control the track. The track is simply the landlord. And so, and neither can the applicant guarantee the racing payments that both the summary and the host community agreement says are an important ingredient of what the town seeks to obtain. So I'm troubled by those. I'm troubled by those issues. I'm troubled by the dramatic change in the content of the agreement, from the agreement that was before the voters when they voted, even though as a substantive matter, it strikes me that this, as I said at the beginning, is a very attractive proposal, both by its nature and by the numbers of people who are involved in it. One thing I should observe in closing is that the initial, the statute provides that if a proposal is rejected and can't proceed, which in my view was the case under the original structure because of the fact that the gaming establishment would include something that was in East Boston, then there can't be another vote for 180 days. It seems to me that with the restructuring, that prohibition is removed as well. That may be academic, but it may not be academic. And so I add that observation as a coda to the remarks I've just made.
I just wanted to make the point that I understand what Commissioner McHugh is saying about the vote being different, but I don't know how much different it is than what we allowed in Plainville, where the applicant listed on the ballot was not the same applicant at that time. And the other thing that strikes me is One thing we have found through this whole process is people are not shy. They tell us what they feel, they write us letters, they come to meetings, they express their opinions. And the people in Revere have not come out to talk to us about it's a different vote, this is not what I voted for. And I find that to be persuasive in that I think we received one comment from a voter stating that there was a difference in the vote, but that voter also acknowledged that they voted no to begin with. So that is something I personally was looking for, was how do the people of Revere feel about this? Do they feel like this is a different project? Is this something they're not as interested in anymore? And I just haven't seen that response.
Yeah, I would echo some of those comments in the sense that we had a lot of discussions prior to any of these in the past amongst ourselves relative to the Phase 1 and Phase 2 process and how the Phase 1 application was not site-specific. The applicant for Phase 1 application was never meant to be site-specific, and in fact, we did discuss and allowed the notion that an applicant could move from one region to another, from one category to another, and from regions A and B eventually to region C. So we've had all of those discussions. In that context, I disagree with Commissioner McHugh notion that this is a fundamentally different proposal, especially at this time. We could find out a lot more after the December 31st deadline for one. But even before that, I don't see, at this point, there's probably a lot of details to dive into, but I don't see how, at this point, there's a fundamentally different or substantially different proposal. I would ask our presenters here if they had decided who the applicant may be eventually to our Phase 2 process. Are we?
Mohegan Sun's going to be the applicant.
Mohegan Sun is the
Yes.
applicant.
Just before we continue the discussion, which is the heart of the matter, just a procedural thing. There was an opportunity for Suffolk Downs to present its case on the HCA and the referendum and the other issues, which they did back on the 21st. So did the opponents. Subsequently, both opponents and Suffolk Downs have submitted written legal arguments. What this was going to be focused on was the new operator. This section of the meeting was going to be focused on the new operator, and as it turns out, also a new applicant. And then we were going to get to the other issues, and maybe we're to have a few words of introduction from you, Catherine. I'm not sure. I think so. If just for on the issue of the new operator and the applicant, I think we do need to make a decision. We certainly did in the case of Penn National, as to whether we find acceptable the new operator and, as it turns out, the new applicant, separate and apart from all the other issues. And but I could be wrong about that. So it seems to me that is something that we ought to. We may not want to decide that right this minute because we haven't had a chance to really think about it. We haven't had legal counsel. The document, the 25-page document we got last night, I just barely have had a chance to read. But if we're, so maybe we don't want to make a decision on that, but I think we should decide that and then move on to the other specific issues. So does any of you have a thought whether we should make a decision on the operator or the applicant now, or should we do that at the next meeting after having had a chance to think about it?
Well, I, like you, have not had a chance to look at that document fully. I skimmed through it yesterday. I was curious, certainly because of today, but did not look at it in great detail.
Okay. I mean, I think personally, I think that this is very similar to what happened in Plainville. And, you know, as a practical matter, I think that it's awfully close, but we haven't looked at it carefully, and we haven't asked our counsel to give us advice on that. So I think it would be imprudent to make a final decision, which is yet another thing floating out in the ether zone while everybody's proceeding along, but I think we're stuck with that. So what I would suggest then is that we come back to that at some subsequent meeting soon, and we thank you folks for your time and presentation, ask General Counsel Blue to kick off the others, and then pick up again where we were with Commissioner McHugh and Cameron and Zuniga. Is that all right with everybody?
Well, I'm not, the bifurcation, if you will, is as to whether we're going to agree that the new operator can come in and be the operator, be the applicant. Is that what?
Both, yeah. Well, yes, as a practical matter, the issue of the operator is sort of off the table. The real issue now is, can we change applicants?
Yes.
Right, that's the real
I
issue.
think that is, I do think
Right.
that's an issue, right.
And I was suggesting that it sounds pretty similar to what we've done before, but we haven't had a chance to really think about it. And I think we would want to hear from our counsel on that. So maybe we should make a final decision, put that off until the next time we get a chance to do it. And
Well,
then-
I
but think we
agree,
have to
I
address these
agree
other
with the
issues.
last part of the statement. That we
Which-
should think it through carefully, and then, I'm not sure that I agree with the similarity.
With the Arway symbol.
Right.
Okay, well, that's fine. That was gratuitous on my part. All right, so the way we had anticipated, then we would have the general counsel come up and kick off our consideration of these other issues. So I think we will say thank you very much.
Just one quick question, I guess, for the city. Mr. Mayor, has the city been reimbursed for your costs from, or the applicant's costs of the election that was held back in November?
It is my understanding that we have been. And just, if I could, Commissioner, just revert back to what Commissioner Cameron had just said, because I think it bears noting. Commissioner, you've actually received one more call than I have. I have not had one person in the city come to me and say, why are we going forward? The only question I get asked is, when? When are we going to be able to move ahead? They voted on a host community agreement that provided certain benefits to the city, whether it be jobs or a revenue stream. Safe to say that now the project moving 1,000 feet down the road into Revere will be a more lucrative agreement for the city. I have, and again, I don't have anything to base, obviously, a vote on going forward, but in my best estimate, I think the ballot question, should it be voted on again on the new agreement, would be even a bigger margin of victory. And that's coming from me as mayor of the city, that's out talking to the people each and every day. Mitch had alluded to the fact that we took him around the city yesterday, and if you could have joined us, you would have seen the enthusiasm that the residents of our community have for this project going forward. So I'm not sure if I'm speaking out of turn here or out of line, but I just thought it bared noting to point that out.
Thank you.
I appreciate
Two
it,
of us
Jim.
could have joined you. Any more than that would have been a traveling meeting. You know, I just, before you leave, I do want to just, you know, I appreciate Commissioner McHugh's thoughts in having a chance to quickly look over the resolution passed by your city council last night. You know, I do have, I'm not in agreement with necessarily the third line about it simply being a land use vote. You know, we could call it a land use vote on steroids or a land use vote plus, because obviously the details of the host community agreement are critical. I mean, with that, you know, it takes up a good chunk of the ballot. If people did not see any means to redress traffic issues or agreements of jobs or local spending or anything else outlined in the, you know, host community agreement, we're not sure how it would have wound up. So I've always taken the position it's a little bit more than a land use question. It's a little land use question plus, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, we've only got about an hour, so let's really cut to the chase here. I don't know if you wanted, if you had, the issue, there was an issue now on the table which we didn't have on the table when we first scheduled this conversation, which is the issue about a new applicant. That we're gonna set aside. The issues remain, for sure the issue remains about the applicability of the host community agreement and the fairness and appropriateness of the referendum. And the issue, those two, I think, clearly are front and center, and I think those are issues that we should absolutely talk about today. The issue of the gaming establishment definition and premises has changed quite a bit because of the nature, because of the applicant changing, and the issues about the track has changed because of the applicant changing, and I'm not sure that we could resolve those now without actually seeing the plan and so forth anyway. So, but I certainly think that the issue of the HCA and the referendum are ones that we should try to deal with right now. So if you have anything to add to say about that, fire away.
No, I would agree with that. There were essentially 4 issues that we looked at. I think you're correct when you say that the issue of who is the applicant has been, the conversation has been started here today. We have to look at that in more detail. And the question of the impact on the racetrack is also a different, slightly different issue now that we know the new structure. So the main issues for consideration are the status of the ballot referendum and the status of the HCA.
Okay. So with 3 people had spoken, Commissioner Stebbins, did you have the opening?
No, just going back, you know, I somewhat disagree with my colleagues that we can paint this as a similar situation in Plainville, because it isn't. Plainville, we understand that there was a swap and who the applicant was.
Not on the applicant issue, I meant, because we're going to get back to that, but
Okay.
on the host community agreement and the referendum.
No, I would echo some of the comments that Commissioner McHugh already raised with respect to the HCA. I don't think it can be downplayed as part of what the vote was intended to be about.
It seems to me that there's no question that this was not what was anticipated. I mean, I think that's obvious. But I do think, I think the questions are whether there was anything, was this eventuality precluded from happening? And I don't see that it was. I see the combination of the expand clause, and I know it's very debatable about expand, and I thought the suffix definition of expand in its document last night was tortured, to put it mildly, but it was, certainly was anticipated the possibility of a substantial change in the configuration. There was practically a reopener, a clause which begged for more development in Revere. There was the clear statement on apparently more than one occasion, but one at least that we can touch, where at least Chip Tuttle talked about the eventuality that maybe East Boston would lose, and if it did, that would be horrible, and we don't want to talk about it or think about it, but we're keeping our options open for an alternative plan if that eventuality happened. There was this precise eventuality was not anticipated, I don't think, although we are told that it was. So I think that bears some merit. But awfully close to this was clearly anticipated. And then you get to, you know, what's fair. So the referendum that people voted on in Revere was clearly not, what they were voting on is clearly not what's on the table today. But what they didn't know, would it have changed their vote? I mean, was material information withheld from them that colored what their vote was? And given these other factors, and given all the other data points that we have, a unanimous vote of the City Council, I agree with Commissioner Cameron. I'm flabbergasted that we haven't heard from anybody, which I would take as pretty clear evidence that there's not a spontaneous, I mean, now that we're saying it, there probably will be, because one will be organized, but there hasn't been a spontaneous outpouring, and there have been many, many spontaneous outpourings in communities across the state, going, you know, way back. So to not permit Revere to go forward with this option when I think all reasonable deduction suggests that had this specifically been on the table, it would have been enthusiastically endorsed, would not be fair. I mean, there's nothing fair about this in any way you cut it. I mean, the people in East Boston have, you know, are gonna feel like an outcome is, somebody's gonna feel like the outcome is unfair here. But to me, this does not boil down to a legal argument. There's no clear legal case that either precludes or permits precisely this situation. This becomes a public policy question of what, try to figure out what serves the best interests of the most people, and in a situation where the interests are incompatible. But I can't see, and I've come in a different place on this, but as I've looked into this more, I can't see a reason, a right reason, a compelling public policy right reason to deny the people of Revere the opportunity to play out their string on this. Where it goes, if they get the chance to proceed, is anybody's guess, but I don't see a way that it would be right to preclude their from going forward.
Well, I certainly respect that judgment. This is a close and difficult call for all the reasons that we're wrestling with here. But I think that the summary you just gave boils down to a difference of opinion as to whether or not the people or the commission are entitled to decide on what they want. We had a vote, and the legislature said we have to have a vote because they wanted to hear from the people. And the people voted on something that now has dramatically changed. And for the commission to say, well, that's okay, because we know that the people, had they had a chance to vote, would have voted for this changed proposal, is, I submit, to substitute the commission's judgment for that of the people. And the legislature, I'm not finished.
Sorry.
And the legislature gave to the people an important role in making this decision. Not the elected officials, however much in good faith, and they are acting in good faith. They're acting. Not to the applicant or the landlord, however much in good faith they're acting, and they are acting in good faith, but to the people. Now I finish.
Yeah.
Well,
Let me just, if it were that cut and dry, I might very well agree with you. If there were no indication in the host community agreement or in the summary of this eventuality, then it would be an even tougher case for what I'm saying. But I think the threads are absolutely in there, and you know, we have testimony as to the intent. We have nobody disagreeing, and the parties who signed the agreement. So there are threads in there that give us an opportunity to think what was in the folks' mind. It's not just us substituting our judgment with no hint.
Well, I would also point out, you know, the Gaming Act gave effectively the elected officials, the local elected officials, a lot of leeway. And we saw it before our very eyes, you know, in Springfield, when mayor decided to negotiate with only one gaming applicant. In many other places, we saw boards of selectmen that decided not to negotiate with prospective applicants. So there is a counter to that notion of how all these factors converge in the Gaming Act, and it's not as absolute as the one vote, in my opinion. I think I agree with you that it boils down to the notion of whether these summary in the ballot represented a fair and concise summary. And the difference of opinions that we have may be really at the core of that. as I agree with the chairman that it was, the host community agreement was posted, it anticipated and encouraged additional development in the city of Revere. So I find very hard to say this, this is at this juncture an invalid vote if we're in that discussion.
Well, this is the kind of issue that it's important for us to try to get to consensus on if we can, but if we can't, then we have to deal with that. And there was a suggestion in the brief from Suffolk Downs, and I may be saying this wrong, but I think there was a suggestion that the commission doesn't have the authority to determine whether the host community agreement and the referendum are still legitimate. And at least the suggestion was that we don't have the authority until the application comes in, and that may be at that point. But I don't, if I'm remembering the brief right, I don't agree with it. If I'm mischaracterizing it, doesn't matter. I'm saying I think we do have the authority. And I think the reason we got into this discussion back on the 21st is because a lot of people are out there trying to figure out what's going on and are looking for somebody to try to clarify muddy waters. Now, the waters are going to stay a little muddy, but these two issues are ones that I think we could deal with and be dispositive one way or the other. So I'm going to suggest, but it's just a suggestion, that we do talk about it further if there's more to talk about, and if not, vote on it. Does everybody?
Well, I'm not prepared to vote today. I think we need to strike that. If the commission wants to vote on something today, we could vote on it today. I think that, and I haven't carefully parsed the suggestion that we don't have the authority until an application is filed, but even if we took some kind of rendered some kind of an advisory opinion, at least we'd give people a heads up as to what was the likely outcome. They'd go ahead and file the application if they chose. There's a lot of work gone into this, and we could make a final decision thereafter. But we had this discussion today, I think, because we were trying to figure out how to give people idea as to which way the wind was blowing, and I'm not sure we've succeeded. I think we have.
Yet. I hope you guys can appreciate out there what it's like to have this conversation. You'd like to be in a conference room talking to yourselves without 5 TV cameras and 250 people, but we have no choice.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, were you suggesting we vote on the referendum question and hold off on the applicant question until we have some more, have a chance to look at that?
Yes.
Is that, so we would be making it, if we go ahead and vote on one aspect, and the other aspect?
The applicant issue and whether there are remaining issues having to do with the track and the definition of gaming establishment. Those, I think, I'm not sure where those issues really are, given all the changes, but in any event, I don't think they're ripe, and they probably wouldn't be until we actually see the plan. Or that's what I'm inclined to think at the moment.
Respectfully, I don't see how we can vote on the HCA without considering the applicant. I mean, that is part of my problem, at least, with the HCA, is that it doesn't describe who the applicant is. And I think to try and parse these issues is to inject an artificiality into something that needs clarification. I just don't know what value would come out of that kind of a vote. So I would be, if we want to look at the applicant issue further, and there's a suggestion that we need to, then I'd suggest that we hold off any kind of a vote until we've done that, and then we have some kind of a vote on the entire proposal, because I think the issues are inextricably intertwined. The track issue the gaming establishment issue, I think, falls by the wayside under this new formulation. But I would like a chance to make sure that that's right as well. I mean, we only learned about this last night, but I think it does. And if that's off the table, then we're left with the referendum and the HCA and the impact of the vote. But the validity of the vote and the referendum and the HCA, among other things, includes whether the identity of the applicant is an essential ingredient of the information that voters were entitled to receive.
But we were talking about having this conversation before there was a change in applicant.
I understand.
And what I'm suggesting is that same decision, the issues that we were going to address before the applicant changed haven't changed, which is, can there be a Revere-only proposal under the HCA and the referendum? That issue isn't changed. There's a second issue, which is, can the applicant come in and essentially buy the HCA and take over and be a new applicant? That's a different issue.
I'm sorry, because I don't see that that the issue is the same. At least for me, it's not the same, because the question of whether there could be a Revere-only vote had to do with the nexus between the racing establishment under 128A and the track and the casino under the old proposal. And that was what gave me trouble about a Revere-only proposal. The theory being that a racetrack and a hotel were the only two required components of a Category 1 gaming establishment. Whether the racetrack was an amenity or something else, it had to be on the property. And that, for me, meant at least difficulty in seeing how you could proceed with only one side approving. That's gone now, so that's different. And it's not the original issue that's on the table. It's an issue that contemplates the new structure, but the new structure spills over into the validity of the summary. So if I'm alone in that view, then that's fine. We can go ahead and take a vote on the old issue. But I just don't think we help anybody understand where we're going if we do that.
Well, I think not making any decision could be harmful as well. You know, the community doesn't know, nor does the applicant know how to proceed. So I guess my question is, if we were able to vote on the original issue, if we saw them as different, and then the second issue being the applicant itself, did we need a week for a legal opinion, or did we need to see an application and see the whole project to understand that issue?
The applicant issue?
Yes, the applicant, the new applicant issue. I think I was hearing two different things. One that would and I agree that hearing from our legal team is always invaluable to me. But the second piece is, then I was hearing, we may not be able to make that decision till we see the application.
I'm sorry, I think I said that. I think the applicant decision we can make soon. I think if we had a meeting next week, I think we could make it next week. Whether there are any residual issues about the track and the definition, Commissioner McHugh was saying probably those issues are off the table. I think they are. Those issues are kind of gone. And the definition of a gaming establishment is, assuming that the gaming establishment is entirely in Revere, is off the table. So, so I was not. I think that probably is really gone unless we think about it and bring it back to the table. Do you have any advice about what's the right way to proceed here? Whether trying to make a commission position on the HCA and the referendum is appropriate and constructive or not?
I think that's the main issue. I think that's the core issue that we are focused on. I think that a decision on that, depending on how you decides obviously the applicant issue as well. So to the extent that the commissioners agree that how they view the core HCA referendum issue, then it would be appropriate to vote on it. If the commissioners are unsure, individual commissioners are unsure as to how they view what that issue is, then it may be worth a little more time to look at it and to understand that a little bit better.
I think it's difficult to parse the two questions. I mean, to Commissioner Cameron's point, we make one suggestion or deliberation or vote today, and then we're back here tackling another question. It stops everything dead in its tracks again. I just don't see that as a worthwhile use of our time, or the applicants.
So say again, so what was the bottom line of that?
I have a problem parsing the two questions, parsing today one vote on the HCA and delaying any consideration of the question of the applicant. You know, to Commissioner Cameron's point, we're going to set our applicant or the community off in one direction. We turn around a week later and slam on the brakes, and everybody's frustrated and confused, and we don't know where we've been and what we've done.
Everybody's frustrated and confused.
Further the frustration.
Further frustration, more confused. Do you, go ahead, were you going to say something, Commissioner?
I'm just trying to, if we're only talking about some legal advice here in order to really understand the new applicant and what that means, and if we're talking about a week, then I don't see any issue with waiting a week, if that's what we're talking about, and making the decision at that point.
That's certainly what I think we could do. Do it. I don't think we should wait any longer than that, and I think we can do it.
Sooner the better.
I'd sooner separate them and do one now, but if, you know, I feel like this has been kicking around for a long time. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. This is one issue that people are debating, whether the HCA understand that. There are divided opinions, but, you know, a week isn't the end of the world, and if 3 of you think we ought to wait for a week, then we can deal with both the applicant and the HCA referendum issue at that time.
Yeah, I think my reason for wanting to wait has to do with the fact that there's still an outstanding issue. So it's not a red or a green light at that point, even if we were to vote today on one issue. So that
Well,
was,
that's a fair point. Do you have any question in your mind about whether or not we have the authority to say either, stop, this is over, you can't go forward because of either the applicant change or insufficiency of the HCA or the referendum, or on the other hand, that we can say, fine, go ahead, due to the sufficiency of both and the satisfaction of the applicant?
I think the commission has the authority to decide both questions in the way that it's comfortable, yes. And I think Mr. Grossman, would you agree with that?
That's right. I think the commission has tremendously broad authority under the Gaming Act to decide all issues relevant to the issuance of a gaming license, and this certainly fits squarely in there.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so, you know, apologies to everybody who has to wait, but I think, you know, I think we have pretty well teed up that we will make a dispositive go, no-go decision, to put it colloquially, on the Revere-only proposal. That's not exactly it, but as a practical matter, that's what everybody wants to know. Can there be a Revere-only proposal? And I think we've narrowed the issues, and but for dramatically changed circumstances, we will try to make a final decision on that next week. Not sure what meeting we have next week, but we'll find one. We have a lot of meetings.
I have a lot of meetings.
All right, is there anything else?